Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Corinne, and today we're going to be talking about what we learned from the first 2 of 24 races of the 2024 F1 season. So getting into it, again, 1/12 of the races are over, and that is Bahrain and Jeddah. And now we're moving into the Australian Grand Prix and Melbourne, and a stretch of Asian and Australian races. There's only one in Australia, but it's still a separate continent. So I want to talk about what we learned and then what we can expect going forward. And we're just going to start in World Constructor Championship order. So we're going to start with Red Bull. So one of the biggest surprises of this season, even though looking back you can definitely see it coming, is the destabilization of the Red Bull racing machine throughout the past month. I would say technically this started right after Lewis announced to go to Ferrari, so the first week of February, but it's slowly and surely gained traction. My opinion is Red Bull Racing is the most toxic team that exists in Formula One, point blank period, and that also includes VCAR because they're sister teams. And the environment has always been rancid, and it's just been more increasingly obvious over the past year and a half after the death of Dietrich, and now that we're moving into this huge power struggle. Looking back, I think this stuff actually started in October when there were rumors about Max leaving, which is now, again, rumors that have not any merit to them, but they started back then, and wanting to get rid of Helmut, the power struggle, it's now incredibly obvious. What I do want to say is, no matter what, if you're not really informed of the Red Bull situation, it all kind of came to a peak when a Red Bull Racing employee filed a complaint with Red Bull itself, not just with Red Bull Racing, about Christian Horner's behavior. There have been no confirmation, which is part of the big issue, about whether it was harassment, which, if you have read any of the leaked Google Drive that is allegedly between the employee and Christian Horner, it is sexual harassment, or whether it's just a dislike of his management style, which is very rough, which can be seen even if you don't exist in that power structure. It's ended up being that person's complaint has become ammunition for a larger power struggle, and it's really unfair to that person. It doesn't bode well because there's just so much we could get into about that situation that I'm trying not to say because I am very biased on it, and I'm trying to be a little unbiased about this. But the lack of transparency from both Red Bull Racing, who I don't remember the exact word, I'll put it in. It's not, I think it was dismissed. So they just dismissed the complaint. They didn't do anything about it. Their lack of transparency on top of the FIA's lack of transparency, because Mohammed bin Salem, MBS, it has there's just a bunch of mess going on with the FIA as well. And if Red Bull Racing wanted to fight the fixed rumors, they're not going to be doing it over the last month, because Checo also had a rolling start in Jeddah and nobody caught that, or they caught it but nobody did anything. So fixed is definitely going to be reappearing if there's not a consistent resolution for this. The sport has made great strides, I would say, in the past 10 years, but it does look really performative to fans, and I do want everybody to know that I agree with that. What's unsurprising about Red Bull is that the Red Bull 20 is a beautiful and well-made car that performs well for both drivers. Unless the FIA issues a technical directive like they did with Mercedes to kill the car and to force Red Bull to go back to the drawing board, we'll see Red Bull domination. Mostly Max. The FIA did intercede in 2020 with the Mercedes car, so we do know that there is precedent for them to do so. And then Max's performance is really strong. The car suits him well. Checo's also doing pretty well with the car. So again, it's more interesting to see who's going to be in P3 than it is P1 or 2, which is a bad side for the sport, because casual fans aren't going to care who gets P3. They want to see somebody win. If the real racing, like we've seen in both races, is happening outside of the points, then it's going to cause a lot of issues. I mean, it's caused a lot of issues sorry, everybody. It's caused a lot of issues in hardcore fans. And as somebody who really enjoys watching Formula One, having to explain to my friends who are casual fans, like, yeah, we're watching for P3 or watching for the racing that's going on in P11 and P12. It's not really like fun. And it is supposed to be fun. So I do want to say there are 2 races, if you're watching casually and you want to catch up, that I would say watching, which are China and Singapore. And they're both in the front half of the season. China will be interesting because the last time that was raced was 2019. Max didn't win in 2019. Max has never won in China. So that would be something really interesting for him to get another track under his belt. And then on top of that, 3 drivers have only raced it once, which are Alex Albon, George Russell, and Lando Norris, who debuted in 2019. 4 drivers have never raced it. Joe, Yuki, Oscar, and Logan, because they debuted last year. And then Esteban was out of a seat in 2019, so he didn't race it. So the last time he raced it was 2018. And then the big kicker is that China does also have 3 drivers on the grid who have won it. So Daniel Ricciardo has won it, Fernando Alonso has won it, and Lewis Hamilton has won it. So it's going to be interesting to see if those people who have won it before have more of an advantage. It's also a sprint weekend, so we're just going to see a lot of chaos because the drivers who have little to no experience with this track only get 1 free practice before going into sprint qualifying, sprint, and then qualifying. So it could be absolute chaos, which is kind of what I'm hoping for. And that would be the fun race to watch, even though I do think that's like not a good time for me, but I'll suffer through. And then Singapore is interesting because Max has never won at Singapore. It's like elusive for him. He's been on the podium, but he's never been in P1. It's just a track he can't master. Another thing is, final point with Red Bull, is that Checo does need to be cautious because if he gains like another 6 points on his super license, he'll be suspended for a race. And a lot of his points don't expire till the end of the year. So that is actually something that could be interesting. Moving on to Ferrari. So Ferrari is looking like it's going to be the second best car on the grid, as both drivers have claimed P3 in Bahrain and Jeddah, Carlos in Bahrain, and then Charles in Jeddah, because Carlos had appendicitis. So there was no way for him to be on the podium because he was in the hospital. However, Carlos going to the hospital was the most interesting thing outside of all of the Red Bull stuff that happened, because we had a rookie debut in Ferrari, which hasn't happened, I think, over 30 years. Went back and did the research. It's actually been 52 years. Like even Charles, who is like the golden boy of Ferrari, debuted in Sauber. So Behrman coming in at 18, qualifying high in P11, and then being in P7 in the points is really strong. It also showcases the amount of talent in F2 and that people really get excited about it. I did have to explain to my friends because the broadcast wasn't clear about why it's so exciting, but once I explained it, they all like really cared about Ollie. And it hits the discussion of, when do you stop signing drivers that aren't performing even though they're around Max's age, and when do you bring in younger blood? Because we're not talking about Fernando Alonso, we're not talking about Lewis Hamilton, we're talking about people like Daniel Ricciardo, we're talking about, to some extent, Pierre and Esteban, but that's the car and not necessarily them. Pretty much anybody in a lower tier. Like, when do you say, all right, it's time to cut it, performance-wise? But again, that's a debatable question. I do also want to say, though, Ollie Behrman's debut has really shown Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari and their relationship, because there were a lot of discussions about Behrman going to Ferrari next year, and Fred Vasseur was like, absolutely not, like, don't talk about that. Lewis is the future of our team. Lewis hasn't even come to Ferrari, so let's not discuss. Ollie has to take some time, develop himself, but Lewis is with us until 2027, which after Toto Wolff's mental breakdown he's been going through the past 2 months, it was very nice to hear somebody be so complimentary, him and John Elkann, who's the executive chairman of Ferrari. And then we're going to go back to Carlos. So I do want to say Carlos doing what he did in Jeddah was crazy. He drove FP1 and FP2 with appendicitis. Then on quality day, had the appendectomy, then came back to the track, which it's on par with Lance showing up to Bahrain last year with 2 broken wrists and a toe. After his P3 in Bahrain, he's working really hard to remind people that he is a driver with a lot of talent and a lot of it's very resourceful and committed. But he does have to walk that fine line between I'm looking for a seat next year and I'm looking for a seat next year and I'm a really good performer versus not being a good teammate. One of the things that goes on in the Ferrari fandom, especially with Churlies, which are Charles Gurleys, is that they are very highly critical of Carlos. There are valid reasons, but there are like Charles blinders, like Charles blinders, shinders, if you will. So people definitely, like, there's just a lot of commotion going on over there. So Carlos just have to be cautious. And then on top of that, something we heard is that Audi may be buying out Sauber early. So the deal may close in 2025 instead of 2026. So Carlos has always been attached to that seat, like as a name. So that could be a seat for next year. However, if that doesn't work out, I would like to see Carlos at Mercedes. I don't think there's another truly valid person for that. And if Carlos does want to wait out that Audi seat, even a 1+1 at Mercedes would be smart. His driving style is not too dissimilar from George Russell's. He has a lot more experience because he's not been in the Mercedes machine like George has. You know, he started at Toro Rosso, then he was at Renault, then he was at McLaren, then he's at Ferrari. He's able to see the car in a different way from how George is. And I think that would be really important. And he's also been shown to be a decent teammate. So I do think that's something Mercedes should consider. Now we're going to fly through McLaren, looking better than they debuted last year. They don't really have any gossip because both of their drivers are locked in until the end of next year. I will say Zach Brown gained a lot of respect from me for his statements about the current Red Bull issue. Like his statements, I think, were the best. His were a little bit more clear than James Vowles, but I do think James Vowles has been more consistent. But Zach's comments in Bahrain were a lot clearer and a lot more obvious. And I'll insert a clip of that here. So this is a summary of what Zach said, and the highlights are, I think the sanctioning body has a responsibility and an authority to our sport, to our fans. I think all of us in Formula One are ambassadors for the sport on and off the track, like you see in other sports. So I think they need to make sure that things have been fully transparent with them. I don't know what those conversations are, which is a fair point. It needs to be thorough, fully transparent, and they have to come to the same conclusion that has been given by Red Bull and that they agree with the outcome. But I think until then, there'll continue to be speculation because there are a lot of unanswered questions about the whole process. So I think that what's needed by those who run the sport to be able really to draw a line under it. Until then, I think there'll continue to be some level of speculation by people, and I don't think that's healthy for the sport. But Zach also needs to tell his employees this, because though Zach said it, not Oscar, but Lando's quadrant, which Zach is invested in, they've been messy. So let's figure it out. We do also have to watch out. The one thing we do with this McLaren is the power unit struggle. So every Mercedes client team that had a Mercedes engine in Bahrain struggled with theirs. Lando already swapped his power unit out, so that's one of 4. Actually, Aston didn't have power unit issues, but you don't really know what's going on with Aston. As an Aston fan, they'll tell us if something's wrong. And so that could lead in future, if he takes more than 4, he does have penalties, and it's something to watch out for. It happens to Ferrari power units a lot. Lando also did a jump start in Jeddah, which is incredibly obvious for everybody except the FIA. He did have excellent tire management in Jeddah. I think that's been pretty solid on him. That's some growth that he's had. And then Oscar's performance is steady because Oscar's less vocal on the radio. If he's facing a major issue, he's waiting to talk about it in the debrief. He also has placed higher than Lando both times, so that could just be coincidence or Lando getting used to the car, which he's stated that he's not super comfortable with it. So either way. Now we're moving into Mercedes, which is Mess City, Mess O'Clock, Toto Wolff, what is going on, brother? Like, you've lost the plot completely. Ignoring all the second seat rumors with Max Verstappen and Fernando Alonso, who Fernando Alonso is not leaving Aston Martin. Y'all are crazy. We'll get to that in Aston. The statements Toto Wolff has made over the past 6 weeks are absolutely wild. First of all, saying he wouldn't give Lewis Hamilton, who has won him 6 out of his 7 World Drivers' Championships, the contract he wanted because he wants to bring in Kimi Antonelli, who's literally a child and has not even finished an F2 season, is out of his mind. He's 17 and on his second or third F2 race. Let him be a 17-year-old. We've seen so many times bringing in young men because this is not a young men's sport. I know a lot of newer fans think that, but the youngest world champion until Max was freaking Fernando Alonso at 24. Like, most of these guys just turned 25. Let Kimi Antonelli be a freaking child. Like, you look at Max and you look at Lance, and like being a young man in an adult man's sport is hard, especially having that expectation of immediately moving up to a strong team. And like, Max started at Toro Rosso, Charles started at Sauber, Lance started at Williams, George started at Williams. Like, let young men be young men and grow into it. Don't set that expectation when he hasn't even truly performed. Sorry. I'm very heated about this Kimi Antonelli thing, if you couldn't tell. And I also think, I know a lot of people don't like George. I actually do like George. I'll talk about this later. But if I was George Russell right now, I'd be pissed. I have worked incredibly hard, and George Russell holds more like junior records than anybody. George Russell is head and shoulders above Kimi Antonelli in performance. I'm not talking about whatever. I'm talking about records-wise. George has held those records he entered Formula One in 2019, so like 6 years. 2018 was his last junior performance. And if I had to sit in a Williams for 3 years and get there, and then my boss, who is also my manager, by the way, is like, oh yeah, our next world champions is this 17-year-old, I'd be fuming. And also, as Toto, you only have George until 2025 because you like locked him in with that contract, brother. And that's why I think Flavio's hanging around, because when Fernando Alonso retires, Flavio will need somebody to manage, and it might be George, and then Toto will be screwed because Flavio is not looking out for Toto. Flavio will be looking out for George. And don't think that Flavio won't convince George to pull a Fernando Alonso at Renault and convince him to jump ship. I know George won't because he's a company person, but I do think George leaving Mercedes would be in his best interest. And also, I just want to say, Toto Wolff comparing Niki Lauda, who is a world champion and a legend in Formula One, calling him a mascot and then comparing him to Dr. Helmut Marko, he's out of his mind. Folks, he's out of his mind. Car is the same as last year, suits neither driver. They're both struggling with it. George is very clearly, very obviously out here trying to not make mistakes. But like, once Lewis is out of the car, mentally he's in Ferrari. Like, he's there to race, he's there to win, but he cares about the performance, but his future is not riding on this in the way George's is. Aston, as always, Lance has made his one big screw up of the year. So let's move past that. We can't tell much about the car because, again, it's been 2 races, and with Lance's accident in Jeddah, we only have Fernando to go off of. In Bahrain, we saw that they both placed in the points. They were the only Mercedes power unit, like I said, that didn't struggle. Fernando seems to be pretty strong faith in the car and strong faith in the team. Lance has always struggled in qualifying, which we've seen, but it looks like this car is a lot better of a starter car, like at the start of the race, than last year's was, which is where Lance's strength lays. So again, Australia, we're going to see how it goes. I do think this is a really strong string of tracks for Lance, and that this was just his one screw up of the year, and we're moving on. Also, I just want to say this really quickly. Fernando Alonso is not leaving Aston Martin, unless it's for Red Bull. And you know what? I'll suffer through the Red Bull machine if Fernando goes there. I'll suffer through it because that means Max is gone. He's stated so many times he's happy at Aston, as happy as he's been since Minardi. And he loves his teammate. Like, he complimented and called Lance better at something than him, which is crazy. If you know Fernando, that's not him. Flavio and Toto are either talking so that Flavio can take George on, or they're trying to get more money out of Lawrence Stroll, which is a complete possibility. I don't think it could be lucrative because Mercedes is very clearly to the outsider falling apart. And also Aston, because it's such a new team, there's place for Fernando once he retires. I don't see there being a place for Fernando retiring at Mercedes. Like they just shoved off Fernando's like main competition, Lewis Hamilton, who has won more world championships and who won it for that team because they want young blood, as opposed to Aston, who are, looking for strong people to stay within their company. We're going to move into Haas. So Haas is kind of a surprise. They have a really great performance over the past 2 races, especially compared to last year. With the new team principal, who knows if Gunther was the problem or if it's just luck of the draw because they have the same 2 drivers. I would say in Jeddah, if you're watching in Saudi Arabia the race, Kevin Magnussen's performance was super funny, and the best part of that race in general, because one of the core tenets of Formula One that people seem to forget is that it is a team sport, and I'll harp on that forever. Him making those mistakes and then choosing to back Nico up and back everybody up, not like be on Nico's team and then back the rest of the field up so that he was able to get a free pit stop pretty much. And with how the drive went, because he hit the checkered flag before people behind him, his penalties pretty much got eliminated. So great teamwork from Haas, great strategy. If this is an upswing for Haas, there's a really interesting point because Kevin has been such a signature of Haas and his experience with them. Like I was saying, putting older drivers into this scenario. Do we want to eliminate 2 teammates who are working well together and who are being successful to put like Ollie Behrman there? Which is a really interesting point. I don't think Kevin or Nico are undeserving in the fact that the 2 of them have both really struggled to stay in Formula One. And if they perform well, as opposed to other team people who may not be performing well, is it worth kicking out older people? Because any team can have a vacancy. Really, any team can have a vacancy. And there are a lot of vacancies coming up. So if that works for them, they don't have to go to Haas. They don't have to go to Williams. I wouldn't put a rookie in a Mercedes. I wouldn't put a rookie in a Red Bull. And there's no point in talking about putting a rookie in McLaren because that's what they did last year. And I don't think there's space at Aston unless Fernando's performance just goes completely sideways. Anyway, moving on. After Haas is Williams. Williams is another victim of the Mercedes power unit issue that we've been seeing. On top of they updated their steering wheels. And when they updated their steering wheels, it was very clear in Bahrain that it was a comedy of errors, with Logan's steering wheel resetting. Alex's steering wheel stopped working at one point. They are very aware of their issues though, so that's kudos to them. James Vowles getting on social media. And I mean, I don't think most team principals could successfully admit to what he's admitted to, but good on him for being able to do that. I think they're having a great social media strategy in general. I know that, like I talked about in my introduction video, Logan's faced a lot of issues, and so pairing him with Alex, who has a very interesting social media presence in general and who's spent a lot of time developing other drivers, can kind of give him not only confidence to be a little bit more public, but also just really cement that team environment and atmosphere that Williams is trying to cultivate, which not other teams aren't doing for various reasons. Red Bull, this wouldn't work. McLaren, Lando talks too much online anyway. Mercedes wouldn't work. Aston, it would not be worth it. I think that people, like, especially like people on YouTube, I'll say it, people on YouTube are so disparaging of Lance for absolutely no reason that I don't think Lance would see a reason to put himself out there. And Fernando. Haas doesn't have the money, so they're just doing whatever. So I think Williams, in approaching it in this strategy, is doing really well. And now we're going to talk about the other messy, like, Toto Wolff is messy, but Lewis and George are not messy. I'm talking about the whole team is a mess. So the sister team to Red Bull, V-Carb, Toro Rosso, AlphaTauri, Team Danny and Yuki. What a mess. And because they are the junior team to Red Bull's senior team, the only sister teams on the grid, they are under scrutiny as well. And the 2 races that happened really after Bahrain, the most interesting thing that happened in Bahrain was with V-Carb, besides all the power units going out. I'm trying to not bring a lot of personal taste into this, but this is a junior team. It is a junior team. It's supposed to be developing to go to the senior team. Having Daniel Ricciardo on this team, who started his career in 2011 on this team, being back on a junior team when he's an 8-time race winner, it's going to cause a lot of eyes to be on him, both positively and negatively. Bahrain was, in my opinion, a setback for Daniel, because he's 34, almost 35, and he went into the drag zone in that car, and then he spun it, and then he called team orders. And because there was no points, a lot of people, I wouldn't say who are Yuki fans, but people in general, because that was put on the broadcast, were asking why. Especially because Daniel had already gone into the drag zone at that point and then did spin out. So if somebody who is having an inconsistent performance in the racing versus Yuki, who had been competing with Lance for 10th until a bad pit stop by the pit wall and then a bad strategy, why was Yuki being asked? And when Yuki was critiqued, Daniel did call him immature, which is rich coming from Daniel, but Daniel's been in that position so many times on the other end, and he's also been somebody who has ignored team orders. So I don't really understand why he was upset, and I do think the way that he approached it was, between the two of them, immature. The new team principal acknowledged that was a mistake. Yuki acknowledged his shortcomings. I'm not saying he's completely faultless, but I do say that after watching Bahrain, especially with Daniel's comments about the whole Christian Horner situation, Daniel is going to be critiqued due to his seniority and due to his performance in the past, and due to relatively, the more I do research on Daniel, the less I like him. So he needs to be very cognizant about his own performance, because he performed similarly in Jeddah. And if Yuki's not spinning out, but Daniel is, and Daniel's the senior, like, he's not the senior most driver on the team, but he is the senior most driver in the sense that he's been competing longer and has dealt with developing different styles of cars. If he's struggling with the car, are we going to see another situation like last season where one of the drivers is struggling with the car when the drivers isn't? The driver that is struggling with the car is replaced mid-season. No matter what, again, like I said, people want to see new blood in Formula One. And last year with Daniel's injury, seeing Liam Lawson come in, people really liked Liam. Leah did a phenomenal job in that car. And though they tried to play it like it wasn't on Drive to Survive, Liam and Yuki have lived together, I think, and have a really good friendship and a good camaraderie. And it's a junior team. So why not put a junior on there? I think now where we're at, it's very clear that Daniel is hooked into Christian. That's his ticket into the Red Bull seat. And with everything going on, Daniel's going to have to be spotless, and his performance is going to have to be spotless, because his comments on the situation have painted him as a member of the good old boys club. And it's not a good look, especially because Yuki has faced such adversity on this team, and he showed time and time again that he has earned his place there. He's outperformed every teammate he's been put against. And in fairness, he would be put in that car with Max next year. But is the Red Bull racing machine fair? No. That's that. everybody besides Daniel's reaction to what happened in Bahrain is solid. The team coming out and saying, it was a bad strategy call. We understand why you felt that way. We understand why the public see it that way. And Daniel not doing that is a huge issue. Sorry, this whole entire thing just pissed me off. Because I'm like, if Pierre, who is notorious for running his mouth, can hold his tongue after what happened in Silverstone, and be like, this is a private matter, we'll discuss it for the team, where Daniel made the mistakes, Daniel and the team made the wrong calls, and Daniel calls Yuki immature. Brother, you're 35. Be an adult. Anyway, frankly, I think Daniel should, in retrospect, have bowed out after the injury. It's very clear he doesn't have, and again, this is my personal opinion. It's pretty sure that Daniel doesn't have the longevity that Fernando Alonso and Lewis Hamilton have. And being on a junior team, it's do it or don't. And right now it's showing don't. To me, don't flame me, Daniel fans. And then we're going to talk about Alpine. Honestly, what's going on over there? Clearly, it's the worst car in the grid. If they're the only team to have reliability issues to that extent in the first two races, they're the only team who DNF'd because of a car issue, not because of a performance issue. Are we going to see another season littered with DNFs from Alpine? How will the American investors handle it? And how will, frankly, Esteban and Pierre handle it? I know Esteban's already been angling for that Mercedes seat. No point in putting him there. I'm going to be fair. He is notoriously not a good teammate, and that is a George Russell team. He and George have never seen eye to eye, and I don't see a point in putting them together. Formula One is a team sport. I wouldn't put Pierre in that seat either. Again, that seat to me is either going to go to Carlos or Alex, just based on logic. And I would not put Esteban and Aston Martin either. I think Pierre could go other places, but I think Esteban has to figure it out, because I would not put him at Mercedes. He's not shown that, unless he goes to Toto and makes like a devil's agreement where I will screw with everybody and you will give me that second seat. And I feel like George would like that, because George wants to win a race, and we all know that Alpine isn't going to go anywhere. Wrapping it up, what we saw the first two weekends, nothing too crazy as far as performance. It's exactly where we thought everybody was going to be. However, after Australia, we have a series of interesting and fun tracks for the fans. So I think watching the first half of the season will be really interesting, with China and Singapore in there. And Suzuka, crazy things happen there. Hopefully the Red Bull situation gets resolved sooner rather than later, both on the social and the car front, as the focus needs to be on the car and on the racing as opposed to the team principal, and internal politics that are reflecting on Formula One. And I also do think Formula One needs to figure out a way to make the racing that are in the points interesting, because casual fans don't want another 2 years of this. Casual fans won't watch another 2 years of this. Heck, people who aren't casual fans won't watch another 2 years of this. They won't watch the rest of the year. Like, I think the statistics for Bahrain, stats-wise, viewership was down 63% for that Grand Prix as opposed to the year before. Just because people don't want to watch it if we know Max is going to win. And maybe somebody else winning in China. 33 is coming. I'm delusional. But maybe we'll see that. Maybe we'll see Esteban Ocon vying for a seat by doing everybody else a solid and just taking Max Verstappen out, especially because they have a history of not getting along. I will see you all after Australia. I'm hoping for a miracle that it'll be some sort of interesting. I think Max still has his appendix, so maybe we'll see appendicitis. And I would put Yuki in the seat. Yuki's been performing better, but knowing Christian Horner, he'll put Daniel there. Anyway, watch F1 Academy. Thank you for joining me. I'll talk to you soon. Later.